Poorly run software projects can cause all kinds of problems. They can introduce technical debt, they can degrade your software architecture, they can vastly overrun their timelines, they can even be canceled and never launch. If you want to be a great software engineer, it is definitely worth your time to understand how to run a project properly. And I have my own 4-step process that I want to share today based on my experiences at Google, Amazon, and startups. Let's get into it. The first thing you need to do when you're running a software project is to secure organizational support. If your organization doesn't support your project won't get the resources it needs to succeed, and your project may get canceled because other priorities outcompeted it. You gain organizational support for your project through finding a project sponsor. That person needs to be in your reporting chain. Usually it would be your manager, but it could also be your manager's manager. And that person needs to be invested in your project and willing to allocate resources to complete that project. When I'm trying to find a sponsor for one of my projects, I try to present it to the potential sponsor as a hypothesis. I believe if we do this thing, we will create this business outcome. And if the sponsor seems interested in impacting that business outcome, and they believe that your project can do that, then they should be willing to support it. Not always necessarily. If they seem like they support it, my next step is to write up a product requirement document to explain the hypothesis in more detail. You can find a template for product requirement documents in my Run Better Projects workbook, which is linked in the description. Now, you don't need to do all of this work if the project is just assigned to you. The person who assigned the project to you is your project sponsor, so you don't need to go and find one, but it can still be worth it to think a little bit about the level of support you're receiving for your project, because even if it gets assigned to you, it can definitely still get canceled and not be invested in enough to be completed. The second thing you need to do to run a great project is to design the implementation. In the last step, we created our hypothesis and gained support for it. If we do this thing, then this business outcome will be impacted. Now we need to figure out how to actually do the thing. I recommend writing a design document describing how you propose to do that thing, and you can send that design document out to the rest of the engineering team to review. This is a very important thing to do because if you are creating a design and you're not getting other people's input, then you are much more likely to make a mistake and miss some key consideration, but also the engineers are less likely to support you because they won't feel invested in your solution. At Google, the standard practice was to have a single person be the approver of a design document and as many reviewers as you want. And I think that's a good way to do it because you only want one person to be deciding when we can move forward with the implementation, not the entire group. The third step to running a great software project is organizing the implementation. We already know what the problem is and how we're going to solve it, but we still need to be really organized as we execute that solution. We need to be organized so we can provide consistent status updates to our project sponsor, and that is going to really help the chances of our project not being canceled. It's really important to be organized when there are multiple engineers working on a project, but even when you're the only engineer working on a project, it can still be valuable because people will notice and then they will be more willing to assign you larger projects that will require more organization in the future. You organize the implementation using a task breakdown. A task breakdown is a list of all of the tasks needed to complete the project. Usually you put this task breakdown into an issue tracker. When you're making this task breakdown, you actually need to go through every single step of the project and understand how to do it. This can be very time consuming. It's taken me multiple days sometimes to create task breakdowns for complicated projects. But if you're just going to glance over the different tasks needed and not really understand them, you might as well not be making a task breakdown because it's not going to be useful for creating timelines, or for giving status updates. The last step of running a great software project is launching and following up. This is the most important step because this is where you deliver the value of your project. If you don't do a good job of this step, it doesn't matter how good of a job you did on the other steps. You have your hypothesis, now you actually need to test it. This usually means launching some software and make sure that you have the necessary metrics to evaluate whether launching the software achieved the desired business outcome. Then you can take those metrics, create a report, and present it to your sponsor. It's okay if the metrics weren't impacted the way you hoped, but make sure you present it as a learning opportunity. If the metrics were impacted in the way that you hoped, definitely present that as a success, and this is a good opportunity to propose a new hypothesis that you can test. Your sponsor will be pleased at your last project and will be very receptive to sponsoring new projects for you, and through this method you can actually create a stream of projects. And that's how I run my software projects. I secure organizational support, I design the implementation, I organize the implementation, and I launch and follow up. If you follow these steps, you will run great software projects. If you've made it this far, you might be interested in my Run Great Projects guide, which is linked in the description, and which contains relevant document templates. That's all for today. Go out there and run great projects.